if I could invite the case officer to present his report, please, on land parcel 5, Bath Road, Keynsham.
Just checking it's working. Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is item 1 on the main agenda. It's a proposal for residential and related development comprising approximately 213 dwellings, replacement sport pitch to facilitate an expanded primary school, means of access thereto, associated open space, landscaping, access roads, footways, cycleways and infrastructure works. And that's at land parcel 0005, Bath Road, Keynsham. So just firstly, this is not the best plan in the world, but this is the site location plan. So you can see outlined in red the land that is related to this application. So it covers a number of agricultural fields. It lies just to the south of the A4 between Keynsham and Salford. It's to the east side of Keynsham. This plan is actually missing, and we'll see in a minute from the aerial photograph, the Higgy Park development, which is just to the west here. So if we move down, so again, you can see it's this line if you follow my cursor. The green area here, the green area, shaded area, is the extent of the Bristol Bath Greenbelt in this area. And so this lower portion of the site, which sort of, if you roughly follow my cursor, is within the Greenbelt. The rest is not. We've got Manor Wood, Community Woodland, just to the southwest. This image also is a little bit out of date in that the Two Rivers Primary School is under construction on this site here. That's as part of the Higgy Park development. There's also a public right-of-way that runs through the site east-west. So I'll just move on to some photographs quickly before launching into the main part of the presentation. But this is the view looking south from the A4 over the frontage of the site. And you can see Higgy Park just in the distance here. And then we move into the site. So this is on the westernmost field, which would accommodate one of the school playing fields, which I'll talk about in a moment. Again, looking towards that Higgy Park site to the southwest. This is looking more towards the southeast. So you can see the land slopes down towards a brook, which divides two of the fields here. So you can see that hedge line there. There is a brook that runs underneath that. And then looking back up from that location to the A4. And then across to the eastern field, which lies behind properties which front onto the A4. Again, just another view from the lower field up, looking north towards those properties. This is just another view from the western, the lower field, from the western end of the lower field, looking back up the site again. Another view looking northwest across the site, so you can see Higgy Park on the left there. Turning around, so now looking sort of southwest, you can see Manor Wood just on the left-hand side and centre of that picture. And then that's directly looking south towards the Manor Wood Community Woodland, which obviously there is public access to that woodland from the site. As I said, there's also some small brooks that do cross the site. And there is a connection through to, I've forgotten the name of the street, but this new street in Higgy Park, the right-of-way goes along this route and straight through one of the fields. So moving on, the site is not currently allocated. So the site is this area in purple here, plus that sort of finger of land coming down into the green belt here. So this is an image taken from the current core strategy placemaking plan allocations. The brown area is the land that was allocated for the Higgy Park development. The purple land, which is the application site, plus that bit down here, has been safeguarded land, which says it should not be developed until there has been a review of the local plan. So, as my report acknowledges, there is a conflict with that policy, in that the local plan has not yet been reviewed, and the development would be coming forward in advance of that review. However, it is important to note that the site, so again, this is the same site here, this is the safeguarded land, is proposed to be allocated within the emerging local plan partial update for around 200 homes. That'll be relevant as I go through the presentation, but that's just important to know. There is there's some land that falls outside of that, but I'll comment on that in a moment. So the application is an outline application with all matters except for access reserved. So that means the layout, scale, appearance and landscaping are all matters to be determined at a later date. There is detailed proposals which I'll come to for the access onto the A4, but this plan is an illustrative master plan. It's exactly that. It's illustrative. It doesn't show the final form of the development. It shows how it could look. That's, I think, so there's a few things to point out, though, that would be delivered by this development and have been agreed as part of the application. So I mentioned the school playing field earlier. Two Rivers Primary School here was originally envisaged to be a one-form entry school, but then it was determined that it could be a two-form entry, but to become a fully completed and furnished two-form entry school, they needed an additional playing field. And so the emerging plan does seek to allocate this land as a playing field in association with the school. And as part of this application, the developer is offering to gift that land to the council to enable the school to expand. So that's one point. There's also proposals for a community football pitch down here in this location, allotments, a community orchard, open spaces and play areas, and blue and green infrastructure, which would be part of the proposals. Now, there's one thing I need to highlight. This little blob here is sort of labelled as a community hub building. Now, I need to be very clear, this is not part of the planning application. It is shown on this illustrative drawing as a sort of aspirational thing that could potentially be accommodated at some point in the future, is how it's put to me. But it's not part of this application. It's not to be delivered by this application or by the developer, and it would have to have its own planning application to come forward in the future. All those other things I mentioned, they would be delivered part of this application, but I just wanted to be absolutely clear so no one's misled. What we would also be securing is, as part of this permission, is two parameter plans. So they would ensure that the reserve matters that come forward do stick to certain parameters which are important. Now, I mentioned this finger of development down the bottom here is within the Greenbelt. However, what we've done through these parameter plans is ensure that these, on this land here, no uses can come forward which are incompatible with the Greenbelt. So no buildings or structures that wouldn't meet the exceptions of the Greenbelt test. So that's why the football pitches, the allotments, the orchards are in this location. So that is one of the parameter plans. This also talks about the net developable area and the area for green and blue infrastructure, so that we can ensure that it's not just, they don't just fill the site with homes at the reserve matter stage, that there is some thought and open space put into the proposals. So that's an important point to mention. We've also ensured through the parameter plans that this purple section up here is land that would be safeguarded to enable the Bristol to Bath strategic corridor proposals to come forward without being impacted by this development. So that's just important to note. So as I said before, the application is contrary to the current development plan, but officers are recommending approval, and there are a number of reasons for that, and material considerations which members should take into account. And there are several of these, and I'll run through them as quickly as possible. One of the key ones is around the council's housing trajectory. So the image in front of you there is a graph showing the council's housing trajectory. This is based on data from April last year. The new data won't be published until part of the examination, but it's not going to be, there won't be significantly different to this. And what this essentially shows, if we look to 2021, 2022, and 2022, 2023, this red line that runs through, that's our requirement for annual delivery of housing, and also the amount of homes we're supposed to plan for. And we need to maintain a 5-year land supply to ensure that we don't lose control over the locations of new developments. So essentially what this graph shows, without going into the details of the numbers, is that whilst we do currently have a 5-year land supply, if you read from 2021 to 2026, that overall adds up to give us a 5-year land supply. At the latter part of the plan period, we would be likely running into difficulty in being able to demonstrate a 5-year land supply. So the local plan partial update seeks to address this shortfall we would have at the latter part of the plan period by allocating some sites. One of those sites is the site that's in front of you today. That's why I bring this issue up. So that's a really important factor, that this development would help to address those land supply issues that we can foresee coming up towards the end of the plan period. And as I said, there would be significant implications for the council if and its ability to control the locations of new developments if we were unable to demonstrate a 5-year land supply. And there would be, particularly in non-greenbelt areas, there would be a very difficult to control speculative applications and to prevent those coming forward. In addition, in safeguarding the site as part of the core strategy, the inspector for the core strategy examiner referred to the site as being highly sustainable and that it would also not unduly close the gap between Keynsham and Salford. And furthermore, his comments at the time suggested that the absence of greenbelt protection, because it was removed from the greenbelt to be safeguarded, so it's no longer protected by the greenbelt, the absence of that protection would weigh heavily in any consideration of suitable locations for growth around Keynsham, because essentially all other locations around Keynsham are within the greenbelt. So that's another material factor I'm asking members to take into account. And then, not quite finally, but getting there, one of the reasons that the land was safeguarded previously and not allocated previously was due to concerns about the impact of additional development on the highway network around Keynsham and along the A4. These were previously likely to be resolved through through the construction of a link road to enable these developments and the North Keynsham strategic development site location that was proposed within the JSP, the Joint Spatial Plan. There was a load of highways infrastructure and a link road that was proposed as part of that. That was intended to be the mitigation. However, obviously the JSP was withdrawn, and since that time the council has also declared a climate emergency, and that's placed a greater emphasis on and focus on providing active travel measures to address issues of highways congestion and to also address the climate emergency. And so there's been a shift in the strategy and some evidence that's been put together that to support the local plan partial update and the release of these lands has been to look at what sustainable transport measures can be put in place for Keynsham as a whole that would encourage modal shift away from private car towards cycling and walking and public transport. And that would give the headroom to enable the safeguarded land to come forward for development. Now, at this point, it's worth mentioning that there is another safeguarded land site, which is not before you today. It's to the southwest of this site we're considering. I only mention that because this sustainable transport strategy is intended to provide measures that would allow both of those sites to come forward. Obviously, those are two separate sites and two separate land ownerships, and they need to be dealt with sort of separately. Their fates can't be intertwined in that way. But basically, the Sustainable Transport Measures document sets out 6 measures that would enable both sites to come forward. They're listed on the screen in front of you. So bus stop improvements on the A4, town centre bus service improvements, LC Whips, that's local cycling and walking improvement plan, improvements between Salford and Keynsham, a new active travel connection to the Bristol-Bath railway path, an active travel connection through the Memorial Park to the rail station, and livable neighbourhood measures in the Chandag estates. Now, those measures highlighted in red are those that would be delivered by this development. So the bus stop improvements, the LC Whip improvements on between Selkford and Keynsham, and a pedestrian and cycle connection to the railway path, and active travel connection to Memorial Park, through Memorial Park to the rail station. The two remaining in the black there, they would have to be delivered by the other safeguarded site. So hopefully that's fairly clear. I'll just to give you a little bit more detail on those measures, the LC Whip improvements between Salford and Keynsham essentially consist of providing segregated walking, or primarily segregated walking and cycling routes between Salford and Keynsham, so along the red line there. So you can see running just from outside the Higgy Park development all the way down to Grange Road in Salford, and also from the west of the roundabout into the town centre of Keynsham. And then there would be also a new connection to the Bristol Bath Railway path. The route shown here is indicative, and it does rely upon the council being able to assemble some third-party land, but we do have confidence that can be done. But the route is indicative because it may have to shift slightly depending on how those third-party land negotiations go. And then there would be, these are the proposals for a active travel connection through Memorial Park. Now there's an issue there that means that this would have to be delivered by the council, but the applicant has agreed to fully fund that with a contribution of £120,000. Moving back to the proposals that the access proposals. So the access to the site, as I said, would be via the A4, and it would be via a new signalised junction on the A4. Now, there are pros and cons to a signalised junction as opposed to a simple priority junction. Members may recall this committee considered an application just to the east of here, just northeast, for an employment site, and members refused that due to concerns about the length of time vehicles would have to be waiting to turn out onto the A4. Obviously, with a signalised junction, that issue is not an issue, as you would have a controlled means of controlling the traffic and the flows. One slight downside is that obviously by introducing signals onto the main A road, A4, you do end up with traffic having to stop and start as the lights turn green and red. But there is a subsidiary benefit that when the traffic lights are red, they may actually ease people's exit from other side roads, such as Pixash Lane or the access out from the Higgy Park development, as the traffic has to slow to stop at the lights. And then this is finally now, so apologies for taking up so much time, but as part of the application, there are a number of obligations and planning contributions. I've mentioned a few already, but I thought I'd just list those out for you so you can see some of the benefits that arise from the scheme. These would be secured via a legal agreement. So just run through them. There's a contribution towards fire hydrants, which would be £12,000. There would be targeted recruitment and training obligations, which would generate 36 work placements, 5 new apprenticeship starts, and 4 new jobs advertised through the Department of Work and Pensions, accompanied by a £17,000 contribution. The scheme would provide 30% affordable housing in line with policy at our preferred tenures split of 75% social rent and 25% shared ownership. I've mentioned some of the public open space that would be secured: allotments, play areas, community football pitch, a buffer to the nature reserve, and a community orchard. The Manor Road Community Woodland, which I've mentioned as well, is coming under increasing recreational pressure because of the new housing developments around it. But an improvement project has been identified to protect the nature reserve and the ecology within it. And as part of a proportionate contribution from this development, a £150,000 contribution has been agreed. Contribution towards primary school places of £713,000 has been agreed. I've mentioned the school playing field, which would be transferred to the council at nil cost. Delivery of the highways access works, the sustainable transport measures, which I've run through, provision of a community cycle shed, travel plan plus monitoring, landscape ecological management plan, car club membership. So the applicant has offered to provide the first resident of each unit with 1 year of membership to a car club, along with the provision of car club spaces within the development and the usual sort of monitoring fees as well. It's worth mentioning that there's no viability issues on this site. It is a greenfield site. There's been no issues with suggested about the viability of any of this being delivered. And in fact, in terms of delivery, there's some good evidence from the Higgy Park development, which was about 12 months between the grant of outline permission and commencement on site. And this is the same land promoter. So I would have fairly good level of confidence that this scheme would be delivered with all the benefits that I've just discussed. Apologies for the length of the presentation, but obviously a lot to go through. I'm happy to take any questions after the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And we have 3 speakers listed, but is Nick Sladek here? I know it's not 2 of the people opposite me, so... and no, I don't think it was the gentleman who's just left, is it? No, that's for the next application. Okay, we'll move on to Tom Rock, if you're available. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll...
Sorry, Chair, I think he wants to speak on the Radstock application.
Okay, take your pick on the mics. They may or may not work. Have a go.
I think it's working. Thank you. Chair, members, good morning. East Keynsham was described by the Core Strategy Examination Inspector as the most sustainable location for development away from Bath. This site, as you've heard, was removed from the Greenbelt upon adoption of your core strategy in July 2014 and has been held in reserve to meet an anticipated need for more housing towards the end of the plan period, and which was to be confirmed through the required review of the local plan not later than 5 years following its adoption. The need has now been confirmed through your local plan partial update, albeit nearly 3 years later than intended due to the delays of the joint spatial plan, meaning that there's no time to lose to ensure continuity in the council's 5-year housing land supply is maintained, and perhaps more importantly, to ensure that homes are available for occupation when they are needed. As you've heard, a policy compliant level of affordable housing is proposed. The proposals will deliver up to 64 affordable homes and therefore make a significant contribution to meeting needs in this district. As you've also heard, the proposals will deliver substantial new sustainable transport infrastructure to assist with easing congestion on the A4 and elsewhere along the route between the site, Keynsham Town Centre and the railway station. That's consistent with the Council's declared climate emergency, in which the focus is now on mitigation through measures to promote modal shift from cars to more sustainable modes, rather than increasing highway capacity for vehicles. The application is accompanied, as you've seen, by very substantial investment in upgrading pedestrian and cycle routes alongside the A4, on Bath Hill, and continuing through the Memorial Park to Station Road. In addition, a new active travel route will be delivered to the Bristol-Bath railway path. The portfolio of sustainable transport enhancements equates to approximately £3.5 million and will deliver significant benefits for the existing community as well as future occupiers of the proposed dwellings. Most importantly, it will make travel on foot and by bicycle a more attractive and realistic option. Again, as you've heard, significant enhancements to green infrastructure are also proposed. First, they will deliver the essential replacement and enhanced playing field to support the expansion of the Two Rivers Primary School to a two-form entry. Given that the two-form entry school has been built from the outset, the new playing pitch is now urgently required and will only be delivered if planning permission is granted for the current application. In addition, the proposals incorporate substantial green and blue infrastructure, not only within the development area itself, but an additional 2.1 hectares of land to the south of the allocation. The latter will deliver multifunctional green infrastructure in excess of the requirements to which the proposals give rise, including a community playing pitch, allotments, food growing, children's play, community orchard, and additional biodiversity enhancement. Overall, the provisions for blue and green infrastructure, biodiversity enhancements, and embedded measures for reducing carbon emissions result in the proposals being eligible for a Building with Nature Excellent accreditation. They'll set a new and a high bar for other residential schemes to follow. I'd like to thank Chris and his team for working diligently and collaboratively with the applicant team to resolve the challenging issues to which these proposals have given rise, to deliver proposals that are an exemplar in terms of building with nature, and will benefit both existing and future communities on the east side of Keynsham. Finally, Chair, the proposals embrace the Council's declared climate and ecological emergencies and respond directly, substantially, and creatively to the new agendas that emerge from them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I just double check before we move on to the third speaker that we do not have Nick Sladek in the room? No? Okay. Councillor Waite? Try it.
Hello? Yeah, okay, good. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. First, I would like to refer to the current local plan and the comments made by the planning inspector when improving it. He stated that there should be no more housing in Keynsham until there is an improvement in the transportation network. Once more, it appears that the developer can't wait for these improvements, preparing to build more housings now next to the already congested A4. It was gridlock this morning when I cycled through it. I understand that there is a local plan partial update, which, if approved, is taking this plot of land from safeguarded status to allow house building on the plot. However, the LPPU is not yet approved. It seems the developer is anticipating the outcome. In the meantime, the government has prioritised brownfield sites and greenfield sites and not to build on the green belt. There are plenty of greenfield sites in Bristol. In January 2022, the government released figures for new houses constructed under the present local plan in Baines. The figure was substantially above the agreed number. Therefore, the LPPU may not meet with government approval, and the planning committee may be wrongly anticipating that the current LPPU proposals are passed. If the LPPU fails, the planning committee will be agreeing to a totally inappropriate development on safeguarded land. Surely, it makes sense to wait until the LPPU is approved before making this decision, which is a delay of only a few months. Returning to the extra congestion created along the A4 by 200 houses being built, the only exit from this development is onto the A4. There already has been the new Higger development next door, which is not fully complete, and so more vehicles can be expected from that location. There is currently a large nursing home being constructed, which will lead to more traffic. Opposite, there is the potential for more traffic with land set aside for commercial development. And there is the construction currently underway of the large new recycling centre, which will create extra traffic as well. All these developments will create more traffic on the already congested A4. This even before we consider the current application. The Withys Park development is for 200 plus houses, which I suggest means 200 plus more vehicles. The application makes no provision to ease motorised traffic congestion, despite the planning inspector's comments about the current situation mentioned earlier, i.e. no more traffic until the road system is improved. Instead, there is a proposal to improve the cycle network. These improvements, I understand, are not legally binding. However, as an active cyclist living in Keynsham, I consider the cycle network proposals to be woefully inadequate, the ones mentioned in red earlier on. Basically, they are unable to be developed in certain places because I just don't see how it's possible given the nature of the land round about it. narrow streets. They won't be separated. It will not be possible along Grange Road. It certainly will not be possible on Bath Hill. How that's going to work, I have no idea. There are existing sort of cycle paths in these places anyway, so I don't see how that necessarily is going to achieve a greater number of cyclists than exist already. The routes are in the wrong places, and they will not meet the required standards. It will not lead to an increased cycle usage locally, which I regret, actually, because that's what we need. But there's those 200 cars going onto the A4. For this reason, I urge the Command Committee to reject this application at this time. Without the LPPU, I don't see how this plan can be accepted. The LPPU approval, I don't see how this plan can be accepted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waite. Questions? Councillor Jackson.
I'm sorry to go back to square one, but we heard from Ms James how much weight we should or shouldn't put onto the changes in travel policy and travel plans, but this application is relying on those exact same changes in policy which the officer kindly put up all 6 different points, and this would address 4 of them. So, you know, that's one problem I've got, and I wondered if we could have a bit more elucidation of how much weight should be put on policy going forward. But the second one relates to, we had the planning application for K2 that was very controversial. I think it was in 2014, and this committee, wasn't this committee, obviously, Councillor Simmons was on it, you know, and Councillor Davis. We turned that one down, and it was overruled by the planning inspector. Now, it was not quite the same because there was an employment area there, but on the other hand, there was a woodland that needed protecting. So we lost on K2, and I'm wondering what weight we should give that if we were to turn this one down, we would not, you know, it'd be the same story again, the planning inspector would allow it. And related to that is, there was also on that application an adjacent site, K1, and I was just wondering if that one had ever been developed. And I'm assuming that the implication is that if we give consent for this site, the application for the 70 houses will, on the adjacent site will go through. Is that also an assumption, correct assumption?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. So in terms of the transport measures, I think a key difference between the previous scheme that you were considering and this one is the scheme that will be delivering 4 of those measures, and we will be tying the delivery of those measures through a legal agreement. Obviously, when you considered the application earlier, you didn't know what you were going to do on this one today, so you couldn't really give them any weight. So that was the advice you received previously was correct, but in terms of the weight to be given to them, that is a matter for committee members. Officers consider those, the delivery of those measures, those 4 measures that I've run through, to attract significant weight because they are 4 out of 6 sustainable transport measures that align with our emerging strategy and would deliver real benefits, not just to mitigate the impacts of the site itself, but by virtue of the fact they're not, they cover so much area, they will provide wider benefits to the community for anyone who wants to use them. Question about whether the application would be allowed on appeal. I mean, I wouldn't put too much thought in terms of, it's not really a material consideration for you. In officers' view, there is obviously a difficulty in rejecting the application in terms of its principle, going into an examination on the local plan partial update saying the site should be allocated for around 200 homes. So if we were in an appeal situation on this site, that would roughly be at the same time we're in examination. So we'd be in examination saying we think this site should be allocated for 200 homes, and in a planning appeal at about the same time saying we don't think this site should be approved for 200 homes. And that obviously creates some difficulty for the council in defending its position in both cases. And then around the other safeguarded sites, so that's KE 3D, it's a catchy allocation name, for about 70 homes to the south. The approval of this application wouldn't prejudice in any way, and it would be wrong if it did, your consideration of the later application. Obviously, consistency is an important principle in decision making, but you have to judge that one on its own merits, and that one's not quite ready to bring before you yet. So I would limit your considerations to the application that's in front of you.
Okay, Councillor Jackson. Councillor Hounsell.
Thank you, Chair. I've got in front of me the printout of the inspector's initial matters, issues and questions, the inspector that's going to be conducting the hearings into the local plan partial update. And question 57 about deletion of policy KE3B, safeguarded land at East Keynsham, the question posed by the inspector is, what is the justification for the proposed allocation of this land now, and is the allocation of the land consistent with national policy as expressed in paragraph 143 of the MPPF? Can you explain why you think there's an equivalence between the planning committee today making a decision on that and open hearings in front of an inspector when local parties, parish council, town council can make their representations in a democratic manner?
Thank you, Councillor Hounsell. So obviously there are two different processes. We have a planning application process, and there is a policy examination process as well. Where I would say there is an equivalence is that the planning application process involves consultation, publicity of planning application, and consideration of the views received. So we have had a significant number of comments, as I'm sure you're aware, on this application. They've been considered in the report, as well as comments from the town and the parish councils, alongside a range of expert consultees. And obviously you can see my considerations throughout my report and my recommendation. Obviously we do differ in process in terms of in the examination process, it would be the inspector who makes the final, well, I don't want to make too fine a point of it, but the inspector would make recommendations which the council would have to choose whether to accept or not. But in the case of the planning application in front of you, it's for the committee to make the decision. I think that hopefully answers your question.
Just to come back on that, Councillor Hounsell.
Yes, just a quick follow-up. Again, it's the question about the equivalence between an independent planning inspector, stressing the word independent, and a planning committee where the Baines officer is supporting or recommending approval of a Baines policy that it's going to promote in front of the inspector. Would it be reasonable to think that there's bias in that second process, whereas hearings in front of an independent inspector would be impartial?
So I think I understand the point you're making, but I think the point is that if you were to say that this process is biased, you would be, because council committee members are making this decision, I'm sure none of the members here today are biased, and that they have come here with an open mind to take account of all the comments that have been received, including those from third parties, alongside my recommendation. My role in this is to make a recommendation, and members on the planning committee to make their judgment. I don't see that as it's not equivalent to the independent examination process, but it is the process that we have to follow for planning applications, and that's what we've got in front of us today.
Okay. Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Now, Chris, I understand that as far as the LPPU is concerned, the developer is challenging certain aspects of the LPPU. If that's the case, could you give some details on what the nature of the challenge is?
I don't have a copy of their representations to hand. I have read through it. From memory, I think they are challenging some of the requirements around delivery of various bits of infrastructure. However, I think it's important that you don't base your decision today on what they are challenging in the LPPU. I think you should base your decision on what is being offered within this planning application. So everything I've listed up on the screen and talked about in my report are what's been negotiated with the developer. So regardless of whether they're seeking to challenge that through their representations to the LPPU inspector, those are what they're offering on the table now today.
But, I mean, currently, the current application isn't compliant until the LPPU is complete. And if they win their challenge, then obviously it's going to have some impacts on this application. So I assume there's going to be a resubmission of an application if they win their challenge. So it has some bearing on what we decide today.
So I would suggest you look at it this way. If they win their challenge, as you put it, at the LPPU, and the inspector decides to dispense with those infrastructure requirements, that doesn't change the position on this application. So an approval or refusal now wouldn't change what the inspector necessarily does in terms of whether those infrastructure requirements are needed or not. And if the inspector says they're not needed, then yes, they could come back in with another application and dispensing those. But that wouldn't be a reason to reject the application now where those are on offer.
Okay.
Sorry, I can see a few confused faces around there. So we have an application in front of us where the application is proposing to provide a number of infrastructure obligations, which I've run through in detail. If that's allowed, then there is one scenario where the developer builds out that and we get all those infrastructure. If it's refused, obviously that doesn't happen. We have to wait and see what happens at the LPPU update. Now, at the LPPU, there's two scenarios. The inspector either agrees with us that infrastructure is required. The developer would have to resubmit if they'd been refused, or just build out what they've got if they've got permission, and provide those infrastructure requirements. If the inspector disagrees with us, then LPPU and that infrastructure is not required, then the applicant would either build out the permission that the application they've got permission for with the infrastructure, or apply again without the infrastructure. So it doesn't really matter what happens at that stage in terms of this application that's before you today.
Thank you. I think I understood that. Sean's still got a furrowed, Councillor Hughes, sorry, he's still got a furrowed brow.
Sorry, yes, I mean, assuming that there are challenges side, so assuming there will be challenges at the LPPU hearing opposed to the sites, if those challenges then win, how would they then be incorporated into this if we've already approved it? I'm just confused how, without the outcome of the LPPU, how we're actually in a position to make a decision. Sorry, it's very difficult to get back to you, sorry.
This is why I've warned committee of this before about trying to predict the future and straying into hypothetical scenarios, and this is why we keep coming back to you've got to determine the application in front of you today. What I've said about the fact that the site is in an emerging policy document and that we are seeking to allocate, I've raised that because that emerging allocation seeks to address the issues of land supply, sustainable development, and transport infrastructure that I've referred to. So if you just ignore the fact that there's a local plan partial update, which I'm not asking you to do that, but if you were to set that aside for a moment, all of those issues arise independently of the LPPU. So those are the issues that you're looking at today, and whether or not this application addresses those. And so that's how I've tried to approach it. I appreciate, you can get into a little bit of a muddle if you try and think about too many different permutations of outcomes, but Essentially, if the application is approved, then on its face, it would deliver the matters that I've run through, the housing and the obligations and the transport measures that I've referred to.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Davis.
Can you just clarify, Councillor Waite said that what we have is not legally the obligations that they have to deliver, whereas it's quite clear when you started speaking, Chris, you did say they are. I want to clarify that they are legally. If we went with this, what we have in front of us is legally binding. And secondly, or linked to that, if somebody chose to go, we didn't go, and say it went to appeal, then these things would not necessarily then be legally binding. That would be for an appeal inspector to make a decision. Can you just clarify those 2 points, please?
Yes, of course, Councillor Davis. All of the matters on the 2 slides here would be secured via a Section 106 legal agreement. So that's an agreement between the landowner and the council. And that would require, subject to whatever triggers we set and agree, the delivery of these matters. So that is legally binding in every sense of the word, really. In terms of if the application went to appeal, it's my understanding that the applicant would be, at that appeal, would be seeking to argue that some of these matters are not required at that appeal, and therefore it would be up to an appeal inspector to determine whether or not each of these matters is essentially legally binding. There would still be a legal agreement, and we would probably seek to secure all of this, but it wouldn't be our decision as to whether we could secure it all.
Thank you for clarifying that, Chris. Councillor McPhee.
The town bus service centre improvements, which are not going to be done here, could you tell me what you estimate those to be?
The detail on that is still being worked up. But it would be part of what's being delivered by, as I said, the other safeguarded land site. I'll just look to my colleague and see if he has any further detail on that. No. No. Pretty high level. Okay. As I said, it's quite high level at the moment, but it would be basically proportionate to. You heard the figure of about 3-4 million raised earlier in relation to those transport measures. It would be a proportionate amount of that in terms of cost.
You mean 70 versus 200?
Yeah, in terms of proportion, so about 1/3.
Although the bus service to the Minsmere estate would not go anywhere near the estate that you're talking about.
The sustainable transport measures, as I said, they're sort of a package for Keynsham as a whole, to reduce the overall capacity to increase the overall capacity. Not increase the capacity, to reduce the overall demand on the network so that there is more capacity to enable these sites to come forward. So even if it wasn't a bus route directly to that site, it would reduce the overall demand on the network to allow those sites to come forward.
Okay, Councillor House, you have another question, and then Councillor Jackson too.
Thank you, Chair. Right, in your report, I'm looking at page 80, and it's in the section of prematurity. You write that where planning permission is refused on grounds of prematurity, the local planning authority will need to indicate clearly how granting permission for the development concerned would prejudice the outcome of the plan-making process. You also have made clear that this application is in conflict with the local plan. Would you agree that if we made a decision today, it would prejudice the outcome of the plan-making process, which is the local plan partial update review that's just about to take place? And a related question is, you talked about the difficult position the council would be in if it was trying to defend an appeal at the same time as supporting the bringing forward of this land. would you agree that actually those two positions are completely consistent rather than inconsistent, because you would be refusing the planning application today because it's prejudicing the outcome of a plan-making process, and there's no conflict between that and actually at the hearings making the case for bringing this land forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hansel. In terms of prejudicing the plan-making process, the NPPF sets quite a high bar in terms of arguing prematurity. And as I've said in the report, I point to the fact that, again, it's to do with the council's position in that we are usually arguments about prematurity are put forward in the case where a scheme is coming forward on a site that is not proposed to be allocated, and it's of such a scale that it would completely skew whatever spatial strategy or undermine whatever plan that the council is seeking to promote in that case. So it's quite unusual to have a proposal coming forward on an emerging site that's seeking to be allocated. The inspector will still consider the site as part of the LPPU, even if permission is granted. And as it's an outline application, there are a number of points in the policy around matters of detail which the inspector may seek to modify, and those may result in different outcomes in terms of the reserved matters applications. I'd also point to the fact that the LPPU has been through this sort of democratic process of public consultation, 2 rounds of public consultation, and we have had the public consultation on the planning application as well. I don't agree that we would be consistent, particularly in terms of, I'll restate that. I think that I think I understand the point you're trying to make, but it is still undoubtedly an awkward situation for the council to have refused an application in principle at the same time as trying to promote an application, because that our position as a council in the emerging plan is the site should be allocated. So if our position is in an appeal that's at the same time the site shouldn't be developed, then that is inconsistent. So I wouldn't agree with that. I think it's fairly obvious how that is a difficult position for the council to seek to defend.
Okay, Councillor Hansel. Councillor Jackson, you had another question?
Yes, I'm struggling as usual. Page 74, I find it always quite extraordinary that policy, where are we? Policy GDS 1/NR2, Radstock Railway Land site, comes in the equation every time, even though this development is complete. However, in this case, I think it is relevant because there was a gross miscalculation on the number of children who would reside on this estate, and there's now had to be, and also actually on another new estate in Knobsbury Lane, they had to extend the primary schools because they didn't calculate for enough school places. Now, looking at this proposal, it looks to me, I know we aren't actually considering the mix of the housing at the moment, but I would think that this site is very family friendly. It would be a good place to bring up children, especially with the wood and the allotments and the community hub and everything, and it would appeal, and the social housing might very well go for young families. So I'm wondering how confident the officer is with these projections for education, and whether there would be any scope for revising them should the results of the 2021 census, which of course we don't have yet, indicate that there will be more children on this site than in the sort of average of the population, as it were. And secondly, the housing projections that we've seen, in that algorithm, has any scope or was there any room for recognising the fact that we all over the district give consents for housing developments and they don't take place? There are at least 200 unbuilt houses in Westfield Radstock area. So I know we're confident that this site will be built, but in those calculations of housing need, is any account taken of the fact that consents and delivery are at a dissonance in this area?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. On the education point, we've agreed that because the mix of housing is not yet finalised, and the mix of housing, so how many 2 beds, 3 beds, 4 beds of houses are proposed, can make a difference to the number of children. We've agreed that the contribution towards primary school places can go up and down based on the final mix to be agreed. So that will be based on a formula in the Section 106. But based on the indicative mix we've been given, it's likely to generate something like 35 children. Our education colleagues have confidence in the methodologies they use. Just quick point though, we would have to fix that formula in the legal agreement. So if subsequent changes to the census, we wouldn't be able to then adjust that. But I'm sure if my education colleagues were here today, they would restate that their confidence in these figures. It is a forecast, so it's never 100% accurate. It's hard to judge who's going to buy a house, whether they're a family or with 2 kids or 4 kids or whatever. But we've got reasonable confidence in the formulas that we use, and we use those across the whole district. On the housing trajectory point, does it take account of developments that don't take place? When our policy team are compiling the trajectory, they have to, when looking at application developments that they want to put into the 5-year land supply, they have to have evidence that those are likely to be delivered. Planning permission can be counted as evidence, but if something's obviously got planning permission, planning permission only lasts for 3 years in most cases, sometimes longer in other cases. And you often need evidence from a developer or landowner to indicate how that site's going to come forward. As I've said, and as you mentioned, we've got a fairly high degree of confidence around the delivery of this site, given it is a Greenfield site, and there's the record of delivery on the adjacent Higgy Park site with the same landowner promoter. Yeah, I think that would hopefully answer your question.
Okay, I know Councillor McPhee wants to ask another question. I'd like to move to the debate. Councillor Hughes, you've got another one. Then I'd like to move to the debate, but the legal officer, Mr. Brown, would like to make a point.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just a very quick point. Sorry, I should get this up. In and of itself, the difficulty in making a case at a planning appeal is not a material consideration. It is still appropriate to mention it. I expect that the risk of failing to secure equal benefits if the proposal goes to appeal could be material. There's a slight distinction between difficulty at an appeal, which is a sort of officer, admin, or work required point, versus the risk of not getting the same benefits. I hope that's clear.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McPhee.
Thank you, Councillor McPhee. I would agree that at the time it was safeguarded, the intention, as clearly set out in the policy, is that it would only be brought forward for development after it's been reviewed. I wouldn't agree that it's my decision that we're considering it now. We've received a planning application, which the council is duty-bound to consider. And if we don't consider it and make a decision, the applicant will take it to appeal, and the inspector will consider it on our behalf. So we have an application in front of us that we have to consider. I would say, I mean, all I'd add to that is I've set out my case as to why I think there are benefits arising from this proposal. It's a sustainable site. It's consistent with the emerging plan. I do not see any downside to in fact, there are benefits to bringing it forward earlier, in that we start to address those housing trajectory issues now, rather than after we've got a new trajectory published and an examination is going on where there will be developers and third parties trying to attack our supply and say you don't have a 5-year land supply, and we have other applications in other parts of the district which are speculative applications inconsistent with our emerging policies, which will be taken to appeal. And there is obviously the possibility of those, us losing control if we don't have a 5-year supply. So that's why I think there are benefits to bringing this further forward early, and I don't see that there's any real harm that arises from doing it earlier than waiting.
Thank you, Chris. Could you turn your mic off, please, Councillor McPhee? Sarah, you wanted to speak. Johnny.
Thank you, Chair. Is this one working now, or I'll just speak up? Yeah, thank you. I'd like to just take the opportunity to remind the committee that the role of the officer is to make a planning assessment of an application that is before you, and for you to consider how much weight to give to the various factors that are pointed out to you. The planning officer has no bias in terms of the decision that you come to. Their role is just to advise.
Thank you. Well said. Councillor Hughes, then I'm moving to the debate.
Thank you. Sorry, it's very quick, I hope. So I'm just to understand the housing trajectory that you showed us. So obviously there are peaks and troughs, and I'm assuming we're allowed to take a rolling average. So what time period are we allowed to use for that rolling average?
So in terms of the 5-year land supply, that is a forward-looking projection. So we have to look 5 years into the future and say, well, what's our annual requirement every year, times 5, and have we got enough sites and enough planning permissions in place to be delivered to meet that requirement over those 5 years. And I believe we've currently got about 5.2 years worth of supply, so reasonably marginal in the scheme of things. We have previously over-delivered, but the way you calculate 5-year land supply is determined by the government's standard methodology, which is a national requirement, and that doesn't allow you to take into account any previous over-delivery. You always have to maintain a 5-year supply going forward.
Okay, and those figures that you showed us, do they include other major developments coming through, like Windsor Bridge and Bath Press?
Yes, so our policy team would include every single application that they can find, because there's no benefit to us to missing them. So that includes all sort of things that they can justify.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Well done for responding to that grilling. So I'm going to move to the debate now, and I'm going to offer to Councillor McPhee to open the debate, and then Councillor Hounsell, who's the next adjacent ward, who would also like to speak, and after that I'll open it to the rest of the committee.
Thank you very much. There is much to commend in this application, and the officer has worked very hard, and I pay, tribute to him to negotiating the package and the work that's been done to playing fields and a number of other things. However, the issue really is the timing of it, and I understand what's been said, but it still seems to be wrong that such an important and large application is being assessed according to criteria which will be overruled in a few months' time. And that means the ecology that means the building materials, it means all of these other things are going to be changed. And as part of it coming forward like that, it seems that the developer can do all sorts of things and change what we can't really assume that that's going to be brought forward. We don't know where we are. So to me, as a local councillor, I reject this because I want to assess it under the new criteria. And I'm not quite sure how we managed to get this far with land that wasn't allocated in the first place. So that's where I stand. And I would make the point, I read carefully the state on prematurity, and it says in that report, I looked it up, is that you need to make a statement about what will be different. Well, I can make a statement. The case is going to be judged under the old rules, whereas if we wait, then it would be judged under the new, properly revised LPPU rules. And I think the inspector would respond to that. Moving on to the second point, which is obviously the transport. Councillor Waite made the point that there's nothing to do with motorised. And the key reason why our land along there keeps getting selected is that it's sustainable. And this translates into having a frequent bus service. That's essentially what that is code for. And the nearest town, Keynsham, is served by an hourly service. Higger along there happens once an hour or once every 2 hours. I don't call that a frequent bus service. And that we've always been promised that these things are going to come along before the application. It's come along, we haven't even got the frequent bus service in the application. So it's not it may be sustainable if you want to go to work in Bath or in Bristol, but it's not sustainable if you want to go and do some shopping in your local town centre. And I don't find that satisfactory. I think those are my two main points.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hounsell.
Thank you, Chair. Last evening, I was attending the Salford Parish Council meeting, their monthly meeting. I go along as a ward councillor to give an update, a report on what the council, Baines Council, has been doing, what I've been doing. And I gave that report and then sat through the remaining couple of hours of the meeting. Now, on that agenda of that council meeting, parish council meeting last evening, was planning matters. And it had Baines local plan partial update examination. And on the agenda it was to agree to submit by the 6th of June further written representation, including any new evidence, specifically under question 57 in this document I referred to earlier, which was the inspector's initial matters, issues and questions ahead of the LPPU update hearings. And just a reminder, question 57, I'll say it again. What is the justification for the proposed allocation of this land now? And is the allocation of the land consistent with national policy, etc.? What is the point of a democratic elected council, parish council, the representatives, they're not paid. What is the point of them turning up last evening to agree their written representations to a hearing about an issue that we're being asked to decide today? It makes no sense at all. There's a democratic deficit in all of this. Now, democracy, as making a general point, seems to me to be slowly being eroded in this country, and this is potentially another small element in this. People have a right to be heard. The parish council has a right to be heard. Keynsham Town Council has a right to be heard. All the hundreds of people that have objected to this have a right to be heard. Now, there are many positive features to this planning application, and I look forward to perhaps it coming back at a future date and us considering it after the local plan partial update review has taken place and everybody has been able to have their say. So I will propose a motion that we refuse this planning application because it conflicts with the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hounsell. Can I just ask Sarah to reiterate once again why we are looking at things in what might seem like the wrong order?
Of everything before you.
Okay. Can I just repeat my motion, which is to refuse the application because it conflicts with the existing local plan?
Okay, so we have a motion on the table to overturn the officer's decision for the reasons stated. Is that satisfactory as a reason? There's a conflict with the local plan, as is.
Has it been seconded?
Well, I wanted to clarify what someone was seconding before someone seconds it.
There needs to be more definition as to exactly what the conflicts are, what policies you're proposing it conflicts with, and a bit more detail around that.
Because the land was safeguarded for potentially coming forward in the next local plan. And we haven't got to the next local plan. We've not even got to the local plan partial update hearings. So this is in conflict with the existing local plan.
If it may assist, I believe you're referring to policy KE3B.
Okay, so that. So do I have a seconder for that, Councillor McPhee? Okay, before we vote on that, do we have some more contributions? Councillor.
Thank you. I should be voting against that motion. I think I understand exactly where the local councillors are coming from for this motion, but I think there are a number of reasons why the committee should vote against it. First of all, I think the officer, Chris, has done a fantastic job, and as this has got an application of 20, that means it's 3 years of work that the officers in the council have been discussing this with the developer. So that's a long period of time, a lot of work, and I think from that the officer has extracted an amazing package of gains for not just the local community, but for Bath and North East Somerset. And I think that is a very important consideration. So the idea that the local plan is fixed and static at this point of mind, I think is where the proposer and seconder are getting it wrong. Planning is always evolving. It never stops evolving. It is changing all the time. And all the time it is changing, those changes are looking at advanced developments that are going on in the future, proposals that are coming on in the future, and changes to demographic, changes to population, changes to government policy, and changes that are being proposed in the updates, which are in the public knowledge. And in the public knowledge, we've got all of these things that are coming up for the local plan. And as I think in answer to one of your questions, our proposals that are put on the plate for this application and we turn it down, if the officer, the planning inspectorate, takes them up, he has no reason to put any of those gains in at all. Now, while I'm sure an inspector would not just take away all the planning gains, he might not pass all of them. So we would certainly stand to lose a package, and that package is quite significant. 2 million in SIL, 5 million benefits package, new local plan allocations coming forward in the summer anyway. So we've got 30% affordable housing, 75 social, 25 shared. And if we vote to overturn this rejection, I will be coming back with an officer recommendation to propose person. But I would like to put into that a new parameter that the 75% social is not negotiable. In far as I'm concerned, that is one of the key things for me that is making this a really good local plan. We're getting a school playing field donated. You know, how often do we get that sort of donation of important infrastructure in schemes that we're doing? We're getting sustainable transport infrastructure. Now, we can argue about the cycling routes, we can argue about walking cars, but what we've had is developers listening to debates at this committee and seeing that transport is not to be in the future just modelled on car-based solutions. The arrival that we get to coming to sustainable transport is not easy, but the links to the infrastructure that we've already got, I think, are an important part of consideration. And Councillor Waite said that he's not quite sure how that link to the cycle path would work. Well, that's for some, this is an outline, that's for something that the officers can develop and do. So I think for all of those reasons, I think the proposal that we've got is misguided and wrong, and therefore I would like to suggest that the committee, when it comes to the vote, votes against it, and I would then, hopefully if that wins, I will come back with a motion to accept.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davis.
I think probably Councillor Crossley said just about all there is I would want to say, because I think from years I've seen this is what the officers have got out of this development is really quite phenomenal, and I think we would be foolish to not take a lot of note of what was in there, and I think, as I say, Councillor Crossley's probably covered all the points, and I'm not one to repeat points, so I endorse what he said.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Chair, it says on page 82, it is considered that these material considerations outweigh the conflicts with policies KE1 and KE3B. That suggests to me that this planning application we're looking at is in conflict with these two policies. I mean, Councillor McPhee wasn't able to give the numbers, but that seems to me to be the case. Now, Councillor Crossley is arguing that the benefits of the scheme outweigh, presumably, the fact that we have a conflict of policy, but obviously the conflict of with the policies is a material consideration, whether or not the fact that the policies may change after the LPPU is approved is not such a heavy one. I think my difficulty is that I've heard this speech from Councillor Crossley before in relation to the Redstock Railway Lands development, where we were promised a package of benefits and we haven't had them. The bridge over to the school, the access to green space and so on. And so this is what concerns me, is that we might not get the allotments and all the things that would benefit the community under the terms of an outline application. The Radstock one, of course, was a full one. So I'm really strongly conflicted, but I also feel extremely uneasy that we're going against policy. I mean, the officer might have a view on this. If we refuse this, and if the planning inspector then allows the appeal, surely he's got to allow provision for the education of children. He can't just let it go through without that bit, and he would be aware of the mental health benefits of having an allotment. He would have that going through. So I think the argument that we'd lose all the benefits is not quite accurate.
Thank you. Chris, sorry, I know you've already answered a lot of questions. Have you got a view on that question in Councillor Jackson?
Yeah, very briefly, obviously none of us can know what an inspector would do and what arguments he would accept or not. All I know that it would be out of our hands, and we would have to justify all of those requirements against our policies and demonstrate that they are necessary to make the development acceptable and related to the development in scale and kind and directly related to the development. Now, officer's view is that they all are, but obviously the applicant agrees with us for this application, for the purposes of application, but if they went to appeal, they might start to make some arguments along those lines that those things are not directly related to the development or not proportionate to the development, and that's where the challenge would come in. So I can't say what would happen in that scenario.
Thank you for clarifying that. Councillor Bromley, you wanted to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to support Councillor Crossley's comments in that, accepted there's a conflict with the current development policy, the plan, but the package of benefits, contributions that the officer has secured, and from what I understand is S106 is a binding obligation on the developer. I think it's an excellent package of benefits, including the contribution to affordable housing, the land along the northern edge to be secured for the development of the Metro bus. So I think, and Councillor Goss has mentioned them all, so I won't repeat them, but I would say to risk losing all those benefits is a big risk if we turn this down, actually.
Any more contributions to the debate before we go to the vote? No? So the motion we have in...
Sorry, Sue.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Hodge, go ahead. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hughes?
Sorry, I just want to say, it's a very difficult decision, this one. I agree that Chris has done an amazing job getting a package together, but I just can't feel that whether that's worth avoiding the democratic process that our public expect us to give them access to. So I find it's a very difficult decision.
Okay. Anything else from anyone before we go to the vote? No? So the motion we have on the table is to overturn the officer's recommendation for all the reasons stated, proposed by Councillor Hounsell, seconded by Councillor McPhee. All those in favour?
For?
And against?
6 against.
So that has fallen, I'm afraid. So, Councillor Crossley?
Yes, I think as Councillor Hodge said, this is a difficult decision, and the planning officer, the planning committee is here sometimes to make difficult decisions. But I think what Chris Griggs Trethewin has done over these 3 years of negotiation with the developer in a place which is in outline plans or is subject for the future development, and bearing in mind there's some very important gains, the Metro bus gain, the allotments, and the fact that they put a lot of that stuff into the green little finger at the bottom, I think shows that they are, the developers are listening to what our officers and what this committee is driving forward for in the future. I would like to just put one caveat on my proposal that we accept this, and that is, as other speakers have said along with me, for the officers concerned, that the 30% affordable is a mandatory part of this permission. And within that 30% affordable, the 75-25 split is mandatory and not for negotiation. So I therefore move that we accept the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Crossley. Councillor Davis, are you going to second that?
Yeah, more than happy to second that.
So we have a new motion on the table. Any contributions from the floor on this one? No? Okay, so we can move to the vote. The motion is to support the officer's recommendation proposed by Councillor Crossley. Okay. Chris, do you want to speak?
Yeah, just to say, Councillor Crossley and others, that the 75%, 25% would be, and the 30% overall of the affordable housing would be written into Section 106, so it would be part of the legal obligation, and then the mix of that would be to be determined in consultation with our housing enabling team when the reserve matters comes forward. So rest assured that would be something that would be secured.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Sarah James just wanted to contribute.
Really just qualify the reasons for supporting the application that you've given. My suggestion is that you give reasons that are to support it in accordance with the officer recommendation, which would include all the measures and benefits that have been agreed by the officer in this case, so that everything is it's clear that the reasons include all of those benefits.
Okay, so motion on the table is to support the officer's recommendation as stated today, proposed by Councillor Crossley, seconded by Councillor Davis. All those in favour?
Six in favour.
Against?
4 against.
Total, so there's no abstentions. Thank you, everybody. We've overrun horrendously, and I'm mindful that we've got people in the room who are waiting for Radstock. So I really, really apologise, but I think I need to give the committee a break, lunch break. So it's coming up to 1:20, so if everybody's comfortable with having 40 minutes and being back here promptly for 2 o'clock so that we can do the one that we should have done this morning. Everybody, apologies once again for the fact that we're running late. I know some of you have been waiting several hours for this application, which should have happened this morning. But if you can move to our third agenda item, which is Radstock Infant School, if the officer could do a presentation when she's ready.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, so this proposal is for the demolition of the existing vacant school buildings and the erection of 15 dwellings with access, parking and landscaping at the former Radstock County Infant School in Radstock. Just a quick verbal update. Members will have seen the update report which was circulated. Probably most notably on there is a new condition recommended which seeks details of the boundary treatments. This is our following correspondence from residents regarding concerns about the existing boundary wall. There's also a verbal update, as this is something which was raised after that update report was circulated. So I'll just read it out for you. Within the planning balance section of the committee report, it is stated that the proposal, when built, will result in the payments of council tax by occupiers. Whilst this is true, the potential receipt of council tax is not material to the determination of this planning application. So here you can see the site outlined in red. These are the existing school buildings here, area of hard standing, and the Bath Old Road to the front of the site. Again, an aerial view just to sort of help you place the site within the surroundings. So the existing vacant buildings here, an area of hard standing, kind of overgrown vegetation. The site has been vacant for some time. Just another close-up. So this is the existing site plan of the existing school buildings. The road, Bath Old Road, running along the front of the site, and an area of hard standing and vegetation. So this is a demolition plan, which is quite useful. So all the areas hatched in red are things which are to be demolished and removed. So that includes the school buildings, the hard standing, quite a lot of the scrub vegetation and some of the trees which are currently on the site. And then we've got the proposed site plan. So this is flipped round slightly, but just so you can place yourself, this is Bath Old Road at the front of the site. So the site will be accessed from Bath Old Road. You've then got 2 blocks of terrace properties at the front of the site. And then this row behind are detached and semi-detached properties with a large amount of the parking area sort of in the middle. And the proposed floor plans, which I can appreciate look very similar, but this is the ground floor plan of the plots. And then the first floor plans with the bedrooms. And then finally, we've got the roof plans. So these 2 dwellings here and here are 2-bedroom properties, so they don't have any accommodation within the roof space. All the other properties on the site will be 3-bedroom dwellings, so they've all got their third bedroom within the loft. Then the proposed elevation drawing, so this is plots 1 to 8. So this is the 2 blocks of terraced houses at the front of the site. So this is the front elevation. This is the access going through the middle. And then you've got the rear elevations of these properties. So it's proposed that the materials for the front elevations will be white lias stone and then render to the rear. And then these are plots 9 to 15. So again, you've got the front elevations of these properties and the rear elevations. I will just point out on this plan, it does say here 9 to 17. This is because this application was originally for 17 dwellings. That has been reduced during the course of the application, so that's just a typo, but it doesn't affect the elevations on the plans. And then the relevant side elevations for the properties which have their side elevations showing. And then finally, this is sort of just part of a plan I've put in, which for the off-site highway works, which are proposed to be secured through a Section 106. These are detailed in the report, but most notably, it includes this uncontrolled crossing on Bath Old Road to improve the pedestrian links to and from the site. Some site photos, sorry, these are a bit dark, but I hope you can sort of make it out. So this is standing on Bath Old Road. The site is just up here. A bit closer, this is one of the vacant school buildings and the adjacent existing property. Again, just a further close-up of the one of the school buildings on the site. And then this is actually the front of the site with the hedging, which is quite overgrown. As I say, the site has been vacant for some time. This is taken from the planning statement provided by the applicant. It just shows the site a little bit better than some of the site photos that I managed to get, slightly less overgrown. And this is one within the site, so you can see the hard standing of the playground area, I believe. And then 3 more photos taken from the design and access statement. These are all from within the site. It isn't that easy to access the site given how overgrown some of it is. But this is the playground area, some of the existing buildings which are to be demolished, and then just overgrown vegetation within the site. So there are a number of planning obligations for this application, financial contribution towards securing affordable housing on the site, which is described in the committee report, targeted training and recruitment contributions, a contribution to traffic regulation order, and the off-site highways work shown in the plan. So the application is recommended permission subject to the relevant planning obligations being secured as per the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have 2 speakers for this one, and the first one is Peter Crook. If you'd like to come up. Hopefully the microphone will work, but you can...
It appears to be working, yes. As an immediate resident of a neighbour of this site, I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today. The planning application is for 15 homes, as has been pointed out. In 2021, however, another application was made for 9 homes and was passed as permitted. In my view, it was an attempt to see if the planning of the site could be obtained. It didn't refer to Hawkfield Homes, but was in fact probably not financially viable. The council had previously deemed the site to be suitable for 10 homes. The financial viability assessments show that there's a surplus of about £139,000 with 15 homes. Such a sum, in my view, should be to the benefit of local residents. The design of the site provides parking for vehicles of up to 3 per property, but this involves stacking from a garage to the drive and will present owners needing to shuffle their vehicles. The police say they don't like parking in a courtyard, page 118 in the paper. People take advantage of what makes life easier and are likely to choose on-road parking rather than their own drive, particularly if one member of the family needs to leave early. This could add 15 to 30 additional vehicles wanting to park on Bath Old Road, when the current plans are significantly to reduce the available parking on the road. At present, there is space on Bath Old Road for about 50 vehicles. This includes parking on double yellow lines intended as a passing area. The proposals will remove 10 to 15 available spaces on Bath Old Road. Where will the additional 40 vehicles go? Existing residents need more space, not less. Due to the closure of Bath Old Road for sewer works for the Bidwell site, which is further up the hill, the site parking has extended into the lower part of Bath Old Road, near to the junction with Bristol Road, and this is becoming very, very dangerous. There are surrounding issues which have not been addressed. Plans show that the property boundaries will be marked by wooden fences, expected lifetime 10 to 12 years. The ability to retain earth movement is 0 on the sloping site on a reasonably steep hill. Legally, there is a requirement for stone walls on 3 sides of the site, but the council have allowed these to fall into disrepair, particularly in the northwest side of the site, where there's a need to ensure stability of the hill, as this affects neighbours at both 21 and 23 Bath Old Road. On the southwest boundary, there is a hedge of Leylandii, now some 15 to 20 metres high, that blocks out light. The plans say the care home plan to remove these, but there's no evidence in the papers that this is taking place. And
your 3
Yes.
minutes is up, if you can
Yeah, okay.
bring it to a close.
I would like to close by saying that I believe this application is premature and that the road and parking situation in Bath Old Road needs to be sorted before it is allowed to progress.
So we had another speaker, Councillor Bruce Sheehan, who unfortunately has been able to make it in today because of ill health. So Karina is just going to say a short statement. Karina's going to say the statement.
Thank you. To the Planning Committee, the traffic on Bouthold Road is dangerous and will lead to a grievous loss of life. We as a council should not permit any more buildings on Bouthold Road. We have to get highways involved to understand the problems we have with parking and rat running that continues to put people's lives at risk. I urge you to dismiss this application. Councillor Bruce Shern, Radstock Councillor.
Thank you very much. Okay, any questions? Councillor Jackson?
I am not sure, and perhaps the officers could enlighten us, about whether we can hold this development responsible for the fact there is appalling parking, rat running, speeding, and a Baines vehicle had its brakes fail and crashed into One Abbey View, which is where the other half of the school used to be. But at this point, of course, it went through somebody's living room wall. It is highly dangerous. When I was ward councillor, I managed to get a chicane and calming measures below the junction with Woodborough Road, which have helped with the people coming out of Bristol Road, which runs parallel to this road. But I'm doubtful, and maybe what weight should be given to the fact that this is a very steep and dangerous road.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. In regard to the existing situation, I mean, at the moment, obviously, we have a site which is vacant. I don't think the site itself can be, sort of held responsible for the existing situation on Bouthold Road. However, that does form part of the consideration from a highways safety perspective. However, our highways officers have found that the application is policy compliant in terms of its parking, and that there aren't significant or severe highway safety concerns which will arise as a result of the development. As I showed on one of the plans, there are a couple of off-site highways measures on Bouthold Road, which from memory include sort of narrowing a part of the road and a pedestrian crossing, and the inclusion of these is considered to sort of aid the existing situation. So the concerns of residents are understood and are acknowledged, and having visited the site, I could see how many cars were parked on the road. However, it's not considered that there's sort of a highways policy reason to refuse it.
Sorry, you wanted to follow up, Councillor Jackson?
Well, of course, we want to get people out of their cars. And I wondered if you gave any consideration to my suggestion that the bus halt at One Abbey View and at the entrance to Woodborough Road have been considered, because if there were a proper bus stop, this might persuade the residents at the top of, halfway up this very steep hill to take the bus at least back up, and that would relieve people from doing short shopping trips. Did you consider having a bus stop put in, or could we make a recommendation to highways that we get the bus stop where the bus does actually stop, even though it's not marked that it's a bus stop?
So there is no bus stop proposed or secured as part of the proposed planning obligations for this application. Tom may correct me in a moment if I'm wrong, but I don't think this is something which was requested by highways or considered sort of proportionate and reasonable for the development. In terms of whether the committee could request that, I think it's something that could be requested. However, we'd have to justify it, and I think that in highway safety terms there probably isn't the justification for the size of the development being proposed. But I don't know, Tom, if you've got anything further to add on that.
So just to confirm, in our view, it wasn't deemed as a necessary or proportionate intervention for this development, and the existing public transport and access to it was deemed acceptable for the development.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Bromley.
Thank you.
Sorry, it was Councillor Bromley. I'll put you on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding the S106 agreement and the 5 affordable units. How much effort must the developer expend in asking West of England registered housing providers to bid for shared ownership of the 5 units? after the damp core stage, as you say in the report, they can just dispose of the 5 units on the open market. What evidence must be provided of their efforts?
So this is something which, the detail of which will be in the section 106, but having had discussions with our housing team, we would expect them to be marketed, in the way that all sort of affordable housing is marketed to registered providers. And, sufficient evidence does need to be provided as that progresses. And that is something which would be written into the section 106. So there are ongoing discussions with our housing team. I think that the situation here is obviously that the developer has said that it's not viable to provide affordable housing on the site, but they are offering this financial contribution, which we have accepted. It's sort of our choice and the choice of the housing team, and the developer has agreed that we will try to use that to effectively split it across the five units, which should be affordable, to try and encourage RPs to bid for them, and then Homes England can make up the rest of the money required for them to be affordable through grant funding. So, it may be that RPs are not interested, and therefore we would just get the financial contribution. So we wouldn't lose out if RPs weren't interested. We just wouldn't have any on-site affordable delivery. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yes. So I mean, in compared with other sort of similar agreements with other developers, has this normally been successful?
This is, I believe, something which is relatively new. I don't think there's many other examples where our housing team have requested such a mechanism to try and secure the affordable housing, and I think it stems from the difficulty of sometimes spending financial contributions which are sought. So having had discussions with them, I would expect the developer to advertise in the way that we would expect for affordable housing normally to be advertised for, and go from there.
Thank you.
Councillor Crossley?
My question's on traffic again. Both the statement that was read out by the councillor and the speaker talked about traffic concerns, but the report indicates about whether this development would add materially to that traffic concern. So did the highways people look at the current situation, and how would they respond to the fact that the road is already dangerous without adding this thing? Forget about adding this. What is, in highway terms, what is the considered response to the comments like from Councillor Shern that the road is already dangerous?
Yes, thank you. So we did look at the expected trip generation of the site, and the developer provided an estimated trip breakdown, and it estimates that there'd be approximately 113 trips throughout the day across all different modes. And for an example, at the busiest period of the day, which is the AM peak, this breaks down as 6 vehicles, 3 pedestrians, and less than 1 cyclist on average, and less than 1 public transport user throughout the hour.
Unless I misunderstood that reply, I think the officer was responding to the increase that the application would make. My question was about the fact that Councillor Bruce Shern stated the road is already dangerous. So have they done evaluation about the current state, not the future state of adding trips to it? Or did I misunderstand your answer?
Yeah, apologies, Councillor Crossley. I think I missed that first bit of your question. So we have looked at a desktop review of injury accident data for the road, and there isn't a significant record of injury accidents. That isn't to say that there aren't other incidents that go unreported. It's only as good as the data record is. But given the breakdown of traffic that the development is likely to produce, that we just alluded to, we don't consider there to be a significant impact on the operation of the highway, and we don't believe there is an existing safety issue. That's not to say that the road doesn't have high levels of parking. and there is some congestion at times, but we don't believe that is a reason to prevent this development at this time.
Okay, Councillor Crossley. Councillor Hodge.
Hello, thank you. I've got a couple of questions. It's related to trees and the design of a site, which there's a few points I don't feel are adequately covered in the report. So in policy SV17, it says car parking and highways should not dominate, car parking should not dominate or dictate the design of a development. And it feels to me that it does dominate the design, the two roads with all the car parking in between. And I just can't find any reference to that requirement, SSV 17.6, in the discussion of design and heritage, unless I've missed it somewhere. And then the other point I'm a bit concerned about is the trees in the arboriculturalist report. I just wondered if you could, she makes a number of points about retaining trees near the wall, so T6, T7 and T8, but also her, the recommended, there was a scope for revision conclusion, and there's a big section of it that relates to that policy NE1 for green infrastructure is not actively engaged, and maximising green infrastructure in the design of the site, green corridors, that type of thing. And again, that isn't referred to. NE1 considerations aren't referred to in the trees section of the report at all. So I just wondered how it came to conclusions on that, meeting that policy. The trees section refers to NE6 and the protecting some of the trees during the construction, but yeah, I'd like to be clear what's happening to the existing trees and the views on the green infrastructure with the design.
Hello. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so in terms of the parking situation, actually, that's better on the site plan. It's the view of officers that this site isn't particularly dominated by car parking. I mean, obviously we are bound by the amount of parking which does need to be provided as per policy ST7. So in that case, all these properties are 2 and 3 bedrooms. They all require 2 parking spaces. Some of these spaces are being provided within a garage. Obviously, that's not possible for every single property given their size and their design. I think something quite key to sort of look at is that these properties here will be the ones which are largely viewed from Barthold Road and within the conservation area, and the design of these sort of follows the existing terraces on the other side of the road. The car parking doesn't front the site. There are these sort of front gardens, which again is sort of a common theme on the opposite side of Barthold Road. The car parking is to the rear and actually won't be particularly visible from this location. And I think that is, in that respect, it isn't dominated by car parking. I mean, the developer does need to provide the parking, which they have done, but given its location, it's considered that it isn't dominating the design. However, that there is a degree of subjectivity about that, and that's for members to decide. In terms of the trees, I'll just go back. So this plan here does show that there will be some trees to be removed. I do believe that there isn't an objection to the removal of those trees. In terms of policy NE1, I don't have the full comments of the tree officer in front of me, but it is considered that there is landscaping on the site. There are trees proposed to be planted, which would be, in the spirit of NE1 and providing green infrastructure on the site. The tree officer did sort of raise concerns about the layout in regards to tree planting. I think that, given the number of houses proposed on the site, what's being proposed is acceptable from the view of myself as the officer. There are also concerns about the relationship between occupiers and trees and perhaps perceived nuisance and shading of those trees. However, that is a perception that we can't predict. and to change the layout, I think would be challenging. And as I say, there are instances of green infrastructure within the site which obviously is previously developed, which I think is a positive of the scheme.
Okay, Councillor Davis.
The speaker said something about the walls and the boundaries, about three sides being white light walls and so on, and they've gone into disrepair. I think is you sort of have conditioned that the boundaries are quite secure, or there are something in your conditions about it. But could you just clarify that, because they also spoke about the development and about due to the steepness of the slope, whether there was any sort of knock-on effect. But I have a feeling, really, anyway, subsidence is not really a planning issue that we look at. It's more linked onto the building regs and stuff. But could you just clarify that, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Davis. So, yeah, there is, as far as I'm aware, it's been brought to my attention by residents that there is a covenant on the land at the moment, whereby the boundary wall will be maintained to a certain height, and it's the view of the residents, and I believe this to be true, that it hasn't been being maintained. It's very overgrown. This is obviously a covenant, so this is a separate issue to planning. However, there are level changes on the site and from the site to the surrounding properties. The plan shows that there will be a timber sort of boundary fence around the site, and it is my view that the developer understands that boundary, that the existing wall is within their ownership. However, I think following conversations with residents, it would be appropriate to attach a further condition, which was in the update report, to secure further details of the boundary treatments. As far as I'm aware, there is no retaining wall proposed, and indeed in the 2021 application for 9 dwellings on this site, which has been permitted, that wasn't proposed for that application either, and a boundary treatment condition hasn't been recommended. So I think that would be a benefit here of this proposal, that we could secure further details of that to sort of reassure residents and ensure that the existing boundary treatments have been considered. So I think that would be reasonable to attach.
Thank you. You had another question, Councillor Jackson?
No, I was going to, well, I could of course ask if the covenant has been lifted that enabled Lord Waldegrave to graze his donkeys on the site. But I was actually going to make a proposal when you're ready for one.
Okay, any more questions from anybody? Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, sorry, I had one more about the viability assessment. I couldn't find the independent viability assessment in the report. I'm not sure whether it was there or not. I find the one prepared by on behalf of the applicants, but not the Dixon Searle one. But it just says in the report that it's broadly agreed. Were there any other points that it didn't agree on, other than the one that you've mentioned in the report?
Yeah, so it was broadly agreed in terms of the approach to assessing viability. Dixon Searle actually came back with the increased figure of £137,000-ish. So that's why I've used the phrasing broadly agreed. So we actually put that to the developer. It was an increase on their second offer, which they have accepted.
Fine, thank you.
Okay, any more questions? No? Okay, we can move to the debate. Councillor Jackson, you wanted to...
Well, I was going to make a proposal, but I am wondering how many councillors here actually know where the site is and whether a site visit would be appropriate. I mean, I'm obviously very familiar because I was ward councillor from 2007, and this site was on my agenda continually until 2015, and residents still ring me up because they want to know the procedure and how things stand and so on and so forth. It's unfortunate Councillor Shearn can't be here, but it's unavoidable because he's also been very involved with this site for a long time. In fact, I think he probably went to the school. Certainly Councillor Christando did. So, this is a familiar one that's of concern to Radstock residents. So my question first is, would a site visit be appropriate? Secondly, I would like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendations, but with the alteration that it should be delegate to permit. because it does seem to me there are a lot of issues that need to be resolved on this site, and if it's delegate to permit, then the officer can continue the good work of predecessors and get it all straightened out.
Okay, so you're not proposing a site visit then? You're proposing...
Yeah, I will propose it and see how many people...
Oh, so
think it would be
that's the motion you're
appropriate.
putting forward now? Is,
Hmm?
You're putting forward a motion for a site visit?
I will put a motion on the table for a site visit.
Right, okay, great.
Best way to
Does anybody
find out.
second that? Anybody, Councillor Hughes, you happy to second that? You can say about site visits here again and now.
It's the gradient and the spatial relationship that it might be of advantage for councillors who don't know Radstock to have a look at. But, you know, they may be quite fixed in their minds how they're going to vote anyway, so...
So...
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
What difference would it make if we were more aware of the gradient?
Well, we have one issue I haven't touched on is this issue of, well, A, the danger of the road, but B, the question of overlooking, which I was going to say a few things about in terms of what conditions we should put on, because it is steep. And 21 and 23 are above the school, but no, if it's not necessary, you know, if everybody's quite happy, that's fine.
Okay, any more comments on the site visit proposal? No, so we have a motion on the table for site visit from Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Hughes. All those in favour?
Three in favour.
Against?
Six against.
Abstentions? So that's, yeah, so sorry, that one has fallen then. So, sorry, carry on.
So, we have finally a plan to develop this site. And I think the consensus would be, from all the residents I've spoken to over the years, is that it should be developed. Nobody is proposing to allow Lord Waldegrave to graze his donkeys in the field any longer. Although I have been informed there was quite a lot of agricultural activity going on there. I don't know how many decades ago, but that's out of the picture now. So firstly, the site should be developed, that it should be appropriate. There was fierce resistance when this site came forward as a proposed travellers' site 10 years or more ago, and that would not have been appropriate. That the question of social housing, there is a lack of houses that young people in Radstock can afford to buy. So I think the subvention that is proposed is a good one. It would obviously be preferable if there were social housing for people who haven't got a proper home. But the committee might be interested to know that the development further up the road, opposite Mendip View, is, I think, practically 100% social housing. And round the corner in Woodborough Road, the redevelopment of Walnut Buildings, and that area there is a Curo property and will be heavily social housing. And also, of course, we're expecting that down in the centre of Radstock, the development of the Radco site, 54 dwellings, will also contain the social provision. So I think the fact that this is a bit constrained it is actually quite appropriate if you take an average across the whole area. It is very heavily contaminated, I know from seeing previous reports on previous applications, plus the fact there were squatters in the building for some time, and part of the concern was that they would be injured by the state of the building. So it's all to the good. But I would just like to see proper conditions put in on the lines of this debate that we've had. And particularly, I'm concerned about the possible loss of amenity and privacy to the neighbours on either side. And I would have thought we could have conditioned it so that the walls of the houses that are nearest number 21 and I think it's number 19 the other side, the school hasn't got a number, would be properly protected. And I think also this question of the boundary wall, which has been raised, is a very important one. It's unfortunate that it's sunk into such disrepair, but I would suggest that the boundary delineation should be to the satisfaction of the officer. I personally think that having a traditional hedge would be quite appropriate for holding the soil together. But there are actually some trees in the grounds of number 21, so it's not too disastrous if those trees come out. So I'm recommending delegate to permit.
Okay, so before I ask for a seconder for that, can we just be absolutely clear, so Sarah's clear about what the additional considerations are that would need to be covered by it being delegate to permit?
Delegate to permit would cover this question of the delineation of the boundary, which has been discussed and the officer has raised, and I think the officer's already got it well in hand. The question of, sorry, mine's gone a blank. Well, I mean, we've already got nailed down, I think, about the social housing, but I think...
You're talking about residential amenity?
Yeah, but that's what I was coming on to, residential amenity and the ecology. The question of whether improved landscaping should be looked at, because it is a sensitive site from the point of view of wildlife that doesn't discriminate on the state of buildings or not.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jackson, based upon what you've just said, I'm going to have to ask you to be very specific about what you are expecting the officer to negotiate if you delegate to permit. So specifically with regards to the residential amenity point, what are you expecting to see the officer achieve? And we obviously will have to consider based upon that whether that is a reasonable thing to seek to achieve. So if you can just explain that.
Well, it's the question of overlooking. I would have thought you could have had blank walls nearest the properties, or if they've got windows with dense glass, just for the sake of the privacy of the adjacent residents. Because if you look at that plan there, you can see that the new properties are going to be very close to the existing terraces.
Okay, specifically on that point, I'm going to ask the case officer to run through what the implications of that might be, whether there are any windows there at the moment, and what would have to happen to frost them or remove them, and whether that is possible. So that's specifically on that point. So I'll pass to the case officer for that in the first instance, please.
Thanks, Sarah. So the floor plan's very difficult to see, I apologise. There aren't windows proposed on the side-facing elevations which face the properties either side of the site. We could add a condition which would mean that no new windows could be introduced to the side elevations of these units. If we wanted to, I mean, under permitted development, if anything was put in the first floor, they'd have to be obscurely glazed anyway. And on the ground floor, yes, any sort of windows could be put in without a condition, but obviously you would have the boundary treatments to protect the residential amenity of the residents. So it's, it's the view of officers that that condition wouldn't be particularly necessary. However, I think that, if members were concerned about overlooking, that we could propose a condition to ensure that no new windows were inserted into those side elevations on units 1, 8, 9 and 15 without further permission of the local planning authority.
Does that satisfy your...
I think that would be highly appropriate. I mean, we don't really want to tie the hands of the officer too much by being too prescriptive, but I'm sure she's picked up the spirit of things.
Well, I mean, I actually have to ask you to be quite prescriptive, actually, because so that the officer is clear what she's seeking to achieve, and we can be clear at this committee that it is achievable. So that does cover the first point with regards to the amenity. So the second point is with regards to the boundary wall treatment. Exactly what is it that you are seeking the officer to achieve with regard to that?
A clear delineation and a stable and secure thing, fences blow over. So either a stone wall or some kind of hedgerow.
And I'll just refer the officer to comment whether that would be something that would be achievable and reasonable under this application based upon the details available.
Thank you again. So yeah, it is proposed that there is a fence around the site. There is some hedging to the rear here. I mean, as I said, I have proposed a condition for further details of the boundary treatments to be provided. I understand, obviously, yes, a fence could blow over, but equally to counter that, you can put up fences around your boundaries through permitted development, and I think it would probably be quite unreasonable to prevent future occupiers from putting up a fence should they wish. I think that a fence would be an acceptable boundary as shown. However, I do think that the condition would secure further details and would ensure that there was further consideration of the existing stone wall, which I know is a concern to residents. So if you're happy, Councillor Jackson, with the condition in the update report, I do believe that sort of covers those issues. But if you want anything further, do let me know.
Well, that's fine. I mean,
Thank you. And the third point related to ecology, can you just clarify what you mean by...
I mean, we've got... I mean, maybe if they put some...
So could I ask the officer there, presumably, is there a landscaping condition at the moment that would secure...
Yes, so in terms of ecology, there is a pre-commencement wildlife protection enhancement scheme condition. There's also a condition to ensure that the wildlife scheme is implemented. There is a condition which would ensure that the landscaping is proposed as per the plans. They have provided a landscaping plan, which is, I don't have a copy here, but it broadly shows what is, in a little more detail actually, what is proposed at the site. That is considered by officers to be acceptable, and it's not considered that any sort of further landscaping works should be or need to be secured. I think that the ecological conditions will cover what Councillor Jackson is referring to. There's also arboricultural conditions which seek to protect the existing and retained trees on site, and there is a condition to ensure compliance with the arboricultural method statement.
That's really...
So thank you, Councillor Jackson. And can I just clarify then, the motion is to delegate to permit as per the officer's report, but with the addition of a condition to restrict additional windows in those elevations adjacent to the site. So it's that one additional condition, in fact, because the other points are already covered. Does that reflect your position?
Well, I would still prefer a wall to a fence.
Okay, the condition at the moment requires details, but not specifically a wall. So are you happy to leave that to the officer to negotiate the best possible boundary treatment? I would take that as a yes then. So, okay, thank you.
Right, okay, so motion on the table from Councillor Jackson has just been clarified. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Hounsell?
A seconder.
Right, so any more for the debate? Councillor Crossley?
Yes, I'd like to speak against this motion. I know this is a difficult site, and I know whenever you've got contaminated land, you've got immense difficulties. But for me, I think this is just overdevelopment of the site. There's too many houses trying to be squeezed in on a difficult plot, and I think that what you'd end up with there is a community that is at odds with itself because of the limited space, the small gardens, and therefore I should be voting against this application.
Thank you. Any more contributions to the debate? Councillor Hodge?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I just wanted to ask another question, actually. It's going back. I just wanted to be clear on the Town Council response. Was it changed? And I don't quite understand why. So that they had Town Council, Radstock Town Council was giving an objection on the 22nd of March because of overdevelopment and concerns about the access to the site. And then there's a subsequent decision on the 25th of April that was a support in principle, but they would like a review with highways officers of the residential parking and the parking constraints. Have you got any more information? Was something changed between those two applications that made the council more happy with the application? And also is this review of their concerns about parking and parking constraints, is that in some way going to be addressed with the conditions?
So no, I don't think there were any changes between those two comments. There was a reconsultation which I issued a couple of months ago now, perhaps 3, simply because obviously the viability assessment was updated, but that's the most recent update. And obviously this application's been in for nearly 2 years, so I felt it was fair to allow residents to make more comments, and indeed the parish council, town council. So I don't think anything has changed between those comments. In terms of them referring to discussions with highways officers, I think that obviously the report goes through our assessment of the site in terms of highways, and Tom has sort of explained that position. I don't think that sort of further investigation is necessary. We don't have significant concerns in terms of the highways, and we as officers consider that it's not refusable on this basis. There are a number of highways conditions which have been recommended, which are listed in the committee report, which I believe cover the concerns.
Okay. Any more contributions before we go to the vote? No? Okay, so motion on the table is to support the officer's recommendation, but delegate to permit to allow for the matter of the residential amenity to be investigated. Proposed by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Hounsell. All those in favour?
Nine in favour.
And against?
1 against.
It's carried. Thank you. We've been going for 50 minutes. Anybody need a break, or all okay? We've just got one left. Okay, we can just allow for the officers to swap over. Okay, so last item of the day, which is 10 Highbury Place. There's 2 applications here, full and listed building consent. So we will have 2 votes at the end, but any questions and debate will cover both of them. So when the officer's ready.
Thank you, Chair. Ooh, get the sound right. Yes, so we've got a full unlisted building application for the creation of a new parking bay at 10 Highbury Place. So you can see 10 Highbury Place is a early 19th century grade 2 listed terrace. It's the end terrace of this row of terraces here that form Highbury Place. And they are all slightly unusual in that they have these front gardens which are separated by the street of Highbury Place. So the gardens slope down east to west, and the application site is in this area at the front of that garden onto the street. So just starting with some photographs. So this is a photograph of that area here, and part of the, as you'll see in the officer report, part of the concern is around the impact on the listed building, because along Highbury Place, these gardens are defined by these low boundary walls, ashlar walls, and these gate piers, which lie directly opposite the front doors, and therefore provide that link with the historic terraces. And they're actually part of the listing, so these structures are listed structures, and hence why we've got a listed building application. So the proposal would be to remove a section of this wall and put a parking area, level parking area in this space here. Just looking down the street, as you can see, if you pick up on the piers and the little walls that go down here, there are a number of, the majority of the piers remain. A number of the stone boundary walls have been lost incrementally over time, although some of those don't appear to have planning consent. And then just looking back at the property itself, this is number 10, so you can see it's a 3-storey townhouse. Further to the north, we've got more sort of post-war sort of development, but this is the end terrace of that listed property. And as I said before, those piers are sort of line up broadly with this front door. This is the existing site plan. So there's Highbury Place, the street. We've got the piers here and here, and the front boundary wall. There's a short retaining wall in here, and quite a large silver birch tree in this location here. And so it's proposed to remove this section of the boundary wall to install a parking area, which is, because it's sloping land, and we'll see that in a minute on the elevations and sections, it's elevated on, it's actually, rather than being built up as a significant retaining structure, it's be elevated on a steel frame so that it can avoid impacts on the silver birch tree, and then it would be finished with a buff paving stones in this area. And this retaining wall would be rebuilt as well. This one with a slightly higher height with buff stone, and steps down into the rest of the garden. So this is the view front on, showing the existing situation and the proposed situation. So you can see that section of wall removed there. This bit here, this line at the back, that's that retaining wall at the back. As I said, they're building that up at the back of the parking area, essentially, so that you don't end up driving their car off the end of the parking area. And you'll note as well, the proposals do include the provision of an EV charging point within the parking area. This is a sort of section looking north, so you've got the Highbury Place at the top, and you can see the slope of the garden going down. And then if we flick back and forward, that's probably the best way to see it. That's existing, that's proposed, so they're essentially levelling it out to enable a car to park on there. This is from within the garden looking back towards, so you can see the gate piers and the wall there, and that's the retaining wall at the end of the parking area with the steps down. There we go. So just to quickly summarise officers' position on this, I'll just point out I'm not the case officer for this application. I'm standing in for them today, but I have familiarised myself with the application. And I think the key points are on page 153 regarding the loss of that boundary wall. The proposed opening of the wall to create a parking area would unacceptably alter this important element of the street's character, fail to sustain the heritage significance of the building, and also appear incongruous within the established and long-standing historical garden setting. Furthermore, the proposed use of buff paving as a finished surface to the proposed parking area would appear uncharacteristic and out of place, and that the current pedestrian entrance to the garden, framed by the stone pillars, has a direct relationship with the entrance door on the main property, and the creation of a second, larger opening to allow the parking would diminish the importance of that link. So officers consider there to be harm to the listed building, to the conservation area and the setting of the listed building, and don't believe that the public benefits outweigh that harm. So officers are recommending refusal, and I'm happy to take any questions after speakers. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. We have one speaker on this, which is Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. I think if I'm right, I've got 10 minutes because it's 2 applications. Is that right?
Double application.
I won't take it all. So I won't take.
Is your mic working?
Shall I change? Is that on? Shall I come a bit closer? Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your time today, and also for considering for bringing this particular application to the committee today. And I'd like to thank the case officer, who I appreciate can't be here today, for all the work that she's put into this application. We've heard there the reason that the case officer cited, or the reasons that the case officer cited for proposing the rejection of these combined applications, the listed building and the planning application. I'm speaking as ward councillor because I'm concerned that with the conclusion that's being recommended here, we're not treating our residents consistently in the way in which we're applying planning policy here. As the report notes, a similar application by number 1 Highbury Place, so at the other end of the terrace of properties that you saw there, was in fact refused by the council for reasons similar to those cited in the report today for their proposal for the rejection of this application. That decision was appealed, and the decision was by the council. The decision made by the council was overturned on appeal by the planning inspector. And the planning inspector in their report noted, amongst other items, that firstly, the majority of the neighbouring properties had removed sections of some of the front wall to create parking spaces, as you've seen, and in fact, in some instances, have even added garages. And the planning inspector went on to say they therefore did not consider that allowing the proposal would result in the setting of an undesirable precedent, and that the application would cause less than substantial harm to the heritage asset that was listed. In addition, when considering the public benefit test for the proposed development, in that similar application, the inspector noted that there would be public benefit to the proposal through the provision of an off-street parking space, which would in turn lead to reduced pressure on car parking within the street, which you can see is congested. For these reasons, amongst other, the planning inspector ruled that on that application, the application did comply with the relevant planning policies, and the application was accepted on appeal. This application in front of you today is very similar to the one that I've just cited, and is indeed the latest such application, with the majority of the properties now in Highbury Place providing for such off-street parking. However, in the report, the planning officer has noted that the difference which should be considered between this application, which we're considering today, and the one that was accepted on appeal by the planning inspector for number 1 Highbury Place, is the intervening declaration of the climate and ecological emergency by the council, which has been declared between those 2 applications. And that the fact that we've made these declarations as a council should, if you like, tip the balance when considering the public benefit. And the officer in the report says, although the application in 1 Highbury Place was allowed on appeal, it is considered that the climate change emergency declared by the council in March 2019 represents a significant change in circumstances when considering this subsequent application. As ward councillor, I'd suggest that far from being used as the basis to reject this application, I would suggest that the importance of both the climate and the ecological emergency declarations add further support to why we should be supporting this application. Not only has the applicant been sure to listen to previous comments from the council and is now preserving the cherry and the silver birch trees and is installing a green grid system to support the ground environment that you've heard. But the parking enables this resident to charge an electric vehicle through the creation of an off-road electric charging point. Such a move is directly in support of the Council's net zero carbon agenda and the key role that the move to electric vehicles has in this regard. Indeed, the resident would not be able to move to an electric vehicle were they not to secure this off-road parking, as it would require a cable to be run from along the footpath, because they'd have to park next door to their house with the footpath. Something which the highways officer in the pack has noted in the supporting documentation would not be acceptable. The case officer is of course correct to note that if approved, this application, there is no available means to secure the provision of the vehicle charging point, to secure its ongoing use, or for this applicant or subsequent occupiers to be required to invest or use an electric vehicle. That's true, but committee members should know that Highbury Place and its residents are in fact, in my mind, a flagship, with a number of the properties already collaborating to invest in a new electric source which is being placed in their gardens to provide charging points in the off-road parking bays for a number of these properties. The fact that the applicant has already invested significant sums in securing the electric charging point, in my mind, demonstrates their intent to upgrade to an electric vehicle in due course. I would also question the case officer's report's reference to the fact that the creation of an off-road parking creates no net parking gain, as visitors to the street will see that people are able to and do park opposite the already existing off-road parking bays. And we saw that in the picture that was presented today. And if, like you went onto Google Maps yesterday, you would also see the satellite image that shows clearly that opposite the already existing parking bays that have been built into the gardens, people are able to park on the pavement side opposite. So we will get an increase to parking. Moving away from that particular point about the electric charging and the additional parking, I would also reflect on the efforts that the applicant has gone to enable a sensitive development. In the initial application, the Bath Preservation Trust noted that the back wall was not using Bath stone ashlar. This has now been incorporated within the proposed plans, as too has the retention of the pillars, which you saw. If the committee members have concerns about the buff paving being used in the design, then I would note that the applicant would be happy to discuss this further with the council officer, and a condition could be incorporated that agreement on this needs to be reached between the applicant and the planning department. I would therefore suggest, in the light of the wider street scene and context, something which was specifically noted by the planning inspector when supporting the other similar application, in addition to the design and specification adjustments made by this applicant since the original submission, the additional public benefit which arises from the additional parking, and the provision of an electric charging point which helps the council as we work together to tackle the climate and ecological emergency. For all of these reasons, I would urge the Planning Committee to approve this application as complying with the planning policies cited in the report, namely D2 and D5 of the placemaking plan, CP6 of the core strategy, and Part 12 of the NPPF. If, however, as a committee you are minded to refuse this application, I would strongly suggest that a visit is made to the location prior to issuing a determination, given the importance of the local context, something which played such an important role in the previous application, whose initial refusal by the council was overturned on appeal by the planning inspector. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Questions to the officer? Councillor Crossley.
Yes, thank you very much. It's quite clear from the pictures. First of all, I don't know if at some point in the past this wall went all the way down this road. I know this road quite well, and all the time I've known it, there's been a variety of situations of walls and not walls. But at what point does the demolition of a wall, when so many don't have it, change in list of building concern, because it seemed to me that if the vast majority haven't got a wall, then what is the list of building importance of that wall in terms of wanting to preserve the remaining segments of it?
Thank you, Councillor Crossley. I'll give the case officer's view is that, yes, they acknowledge that parts of that wall have been removed. Quite a lot of the wall has been removed down that street. But that remains is a positive aspect of the historic significance of the listed terrace. So it's making a positive contribution, the stuff that remains, and the less of it that does remain, the more important that is to retain. So for every little bit that's removed, what remains afterwards gains in importance, is how they've stated it in the report. So yes, in terms of the appeal decision at number 1, Highbury Place, that was allowed, and the comments have been accurately reported about the points around the climate emergency and providing off-street parking as in that context. But there is an incremental harm that builds over time as you lose more and more of it. So that's the case officer's view on this case.
Can I have a follow-up? Thank you very much. When we turned down number 1 and the inspector overruled that, did we lose the whole of that section of wall, or when like this, just a little bit of an access? So is there a bit of that at number 1? Is there a bit of that wall remaining? When the inspector gave his ruling, did he allow the whole wall to go down, or was it just the car parking access bit of the wall, as we're considering here?
Hello, there we go. Yeah, I believe, I did look at the plans, and I believe that the gate piers were retained, and it was only a section of the wall that was removed. It was obviously quite a large section to enable a car to get in, but it was, yes, similar to what we have in front of us, which is a section being removed rather than the whole thing.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. So number 1 is this property here. So it's end of terrace property. So it's the other end of the terrace to number 10. So it's not a corner property as such, but it is an end of terrace property. And the second part of your question, is it relevant? I don't think the decisions on boundary walls in Radstock are relevant to the consideration today. Although I think that the sort of point around the contribution that low stone boundary walls and boundary walls can make towards the character or the historic significance of traditional or listed buildings, that is a relevant consideration today, and you might therefore see some parallels between what you've experienced in Radstock in that way. So it's the character and contribution that these boundary walls make to the historic significance of the building and the conservation area are definitely relevant considerations for you today.
Okay, does that answer your questions, Councillor Jackson? Any more? Councillor Crossley, I had another one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Crossley. I'll try and see if the answer's for you in the report, but my understanding would be that it has, in terms of the exact circumstances of each one that's been taken down, I don't think the exact circumstances have been examined in each case, but the case officer has confirmed that they couldn't find any consents for those. So that either means they've been taken down without consent or that they've been removed prior to the implementation of the town and country planning system as we know it now, with protections over listed structures. So I don't have a full answer for you on that, unfortunately. If there are, I'm not aware of any open enforcement cases on this, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any, because I'm just not aware that there are any.
Okay, Councillor Hodge.
Yes, thanks, Chris. I just had a question on the loss of the wall stone. I don't think this is the case, but I just wondered if the retaining wall that is coming down is going to be used anywhere else, because is it going to be used to construct the bar stone wall at the back? Because it is quite often the case that a planning application might offer up to reuse the stone elsewhere on the site for another bit of wall. It seems that it might be new bar stone wall that is being constructed at the back, and will lose the stone that is taken out.
Okay. That is my understanding, Councillor Hodge, that I haven't seen any reference to reclaiming Bath stone. Looking at the extent of walling, I don't think you would be able to build that wall just with the reclaimed stone from the front, so it would be new stone.
Any more questions? I have a question, actually. The no net change in parking, looking at the photos that you showed in your presentation, it seems that the residents choose to park on the side opposite where this new proposed parking space would be. I assume that's because they will be blocking parking spaces on the other side at various points in the road, and if they didn't choose that side, it would make, even if they parked in front of the ones that weren't parking spaces, it would make a chicane, which would be difficult, because it doesn't look like there's room for two cars to park opposite each other. So that being so, if you've understood that, that being so, surely there would be a net gain of one space, because the person would no longer be parking outside their front door, and now they'd be parking on the new parking space. Sorry, I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes. I'll pass over to Tom to answer that one.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. To be honest, I don't think I can give you a conclusive answer either way. There's a relationship between how wide a parking space is and how much aisle width, if you like, you have to turn in the highway. I've looked at the plans, and the parking space would have about 5 metres aisle width, if you like, in the road to turn. That's smaller than the recommended width for a standard parking space, but that's not to say it's impossible if you make your turn with more manoeuvres. So it seems likely that you probably would gain one extra space, and some people would probably avoid parking opposite the space. Others might not. I couldn't say either way.
Okay. Right, any more questions? No? You have another one, Councillor Jackson?
So it doesn't...
No, you're absolutely right, and I didn't specifically mean that they might, but it would just vacate a space. So, yeah, but you're absolutely right, yeah, and certainly in Bath, nobody has a right to any space, even if you've got a residence permit. Have I answered that correctly?
I was just thinking they might go and buy another car. It doesn't follow that you will move a car off this road onto a garden.
Yeah.
Especially if they've always fancied having an electric car as well as their old-fashioned.
You're quite right. My point was more really, I guess, that disputing that there was no net difference in the number of parking spaces available. Okay, debate. Debate? Yeah, why not? Carry on, Councillor Hughes.
Sorry, it looks to me on this road that it looks like the horse bolted a long time ago, sadly. So I think unless we actively pursue a policy of forcing people to reinstate these walls that have been taken down, it does seem that we're putting this resident at a disadvantage compared to his neighbours when at least the 8 adjacent properties have already removed the walls and there's not going to be any penalty to them to reinstate those. So I have to say that I agree with the comments of Councillor Davis on this one.
Thank you. Want to contribute, Councillor Crossley?
I think Councillor Hughes sums it up nicely. The horse is bolted, although I would just politely point out that not many people drive by horse and carriage anymore in Bath. But it seems to me that actually what's more important is that we recognise that this is going on, and actually that we allow this, but impose a condition that the material that is used to provide this parking bay is we can add some sort of condition about the materials that are used so that it doesn't create yet another flat concrete space which doesn't let water through it, which is also adds to problems as we concrete over everything. So as long as it's an absorbent or a material, whatever the correct term is, that allows water to flow through it, or as part of the mechanism, because it's on a slope, so you can always put a trench at one end, as long as it allows water into the subsoil underneath, then I think we should permit it. And the reason I would move permitting is because the horse is bolted, which isn't a planning permission, so planning reason. I think what we've got is that we're disagreeing with the officer because the damage is not material to the listed building of the wall, because the wall has been so damaged already. And in fact, this is an improvement and consolidation of it by ensuring that we keep a part of that remnant wall while recognising the changing circumstances.
Okay, was actually a motion. Yeah, okay, so before I ask for a seconder, and I know Councillor Hodge also wanted to contribute to the debate, did you? Yeah, before I do that, can I just check that we've got a valid statement there? Are you happy with that?
I was just going to check actually what the condition, if there is a condition at the moment on the application that achieves the provision to be able to get this permeable material. So I was just going into the report that says, as it stands, would we be able to achieve that?
So obviously no recommended conditions at the moment because it's a recommended refusal, but if it was delegated to permit, we would be able to do that, and we would be able to have a condition that would ensure that we could agree the details of the finish of the parking area, and we could seek to ensure that that's suitable in terms of permeability and in terms of its finish to preserve the setting of the listed building. Just on the motion, I think it might be just worth saying that even in the case of the inspector's decision on number 1, he did conclude that there was some harm now to the listed building, less than substantial harm, and that is what officers have concluded in this case. And but in the case of the appeal, the inspector said that had been outweighed by the public benefits. And so unless members are disagreeing that there's any harm at all to the listed building, then they would need to list the public benefits that outweigh that harm.
So we've got a delegate to permit. to allow some conditions around the materials and the finish and everything for the hard standing. Yeah. All okay? Do we have a seconder? Councillor Davis? Councillor Hodge, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I was just going to, I think Chris covered it actually. I just wanted to be clear that the material, this paving material isn't just drain, you know, that it enhances the, or is consistent with the listed properties nearby and choice of material. Yeah.
Okay, great. Councillor Jackson?
Well, I'm sorry, I have to disagree 100%. The fact that possibly the majority of the walls have already gone is all the more reason for conserving those that remain. And if somebody buys a listed building house, they've just got to take the obligations that come with it, like preserving the character of the area. And, you know, we have required people who've demolished historic walls in Westfield to rebuild them. I think we ought to be sending out a signal loud and clear to the residents that we will not allow this demolition to go on. But the other crucial point, of course, is the climate emergency. We should not be encouraging gardens to be green-created over in this way. And, you know, gardens should be conserved as well as conservation areas, not to mention the fact that there's absolutely no reason why the owner should just move their car into this new space. They might be going to buy a new car, and we'd in fact be encouraging car use, which is contrary to our incoming policies about getting people to use alternative means of transport. So I'm afraid I'll be voting against this resolution.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jackson. Do you have any more contributions to the debate before we move to a vote? No? Okay, so the motion we have on the table is to overturn the officer's recommendation to delegate to permit with a condition as stated, covering the hard standing materials and finish, etc. Proposed by Councillor Crossley, seconded by Councillor Davis. All those in favour?
Eight in favour.
Against?
2 against.
Thank you, that is carried. And the listed building? Councillor Crossley, Councillor Davis, are you happy to? So same motion for the listed building consent. All those in favour?
8 in favour.
And against?
2 against.
That's a full count. Thank you, everybody. Right, that's the end of our applications today. Thank you, everyone. Item 8, quarterly performance report covering 1st of January to 31st of March. Any questions or comments on that? Councillor Jackson.
Once again, looking at the enforcement score on page 171, I know that our enforcement team have been under very great pressure, but I do hope we will be able to catch up with the backlog and get some of these long-standing cases that have been running for years and years, especially in my ward. I would say that one time resolved. So full support to our
Noted and supported, thank you. So the committee is asked to note the report. No other comments. Same thing on item 9, the appeals report. Do we have any comments or questions on that? If not, if you could all note it, please. So date of the next meeting, Wednesday the 1st of June. We haven't got any site visits from today, but some may crop up, in which case it's Monday the 23rd of May. And I'll close the meeting. Thank you, everybody.